With a decade behind us, now is a perfect time to look back at some of the highlights of gaming. Something I noticed when I was looking at other people's lists is that, while the quality of each year varies, there doesn't seem to be a genuine bad year for games. There's always something to look forward to or an older overlooked title to check out, a trend that may happily continue this decade. You know the drill, this is an opinion-based list. These are the ones I personally enjoy the most despite certain flaws, not the ones that are the best on a technical point of view or games that got the highest rating online. No more than one game per franchise, and also, this might as well be my top 20 favorite games of all time, since I'm much more into modern games with exception of a handful of titles. Anyways, let's not waste any more time and start the list. Number 20. Resident Evil VII, the Deluxe Edition. A welcome return to the survival horror of Resident Evil. While I personally enjoy the action side of the Resident Evil series, it's the survival horror titles that placed Resident Evil on the radar, and this is where it shines the most. Resident Evil 7 is a great experience that perfectly mixes suspense, creepy weirdness, and absurd action to create an awesome roller coaster ride of a game. There is a ton of personality added to the crazy family members who imprison you, from the fucked up son that plays Saw-like gory puzzles with you, the dirty bug-infested mother, or the menacing father that nonchalantly breaks down walls when he chases you. Especially in VR, this could offer some intense moments.
Yeah, I'm gonna take you for a ride. No!
The DLC adds a lot to the overall experience, and I feel you're missing out if you haven't played the DLC. It includes all kinds of extra chapters, like one that shows how the family was before all hell broke loose, one that shows what happens to certain characters after the events of the game, a fun escape room puzzle, a fun action sequence starting the classic Chris Redfield, or a messed up card game where they cut off your fingers if you make mistakes.
You psycho fuck, you really did it! Hell of a game, right?
An awesome addition to the Resident Evil library. Who knows what a potential Part 8 will bring to the table? Number 19. King's Quest. Even with the lesser Episode 4 and the weak Episode 5, the first 3 episodes made such a big impact that I still consider it one of my favorite games of the past decade. The writing, the characters, the voice acting, the creativity of the world it describes. It's one of the few games where I could be completely immersed in its world, forgetting all about reality and not realizing hours have passed by the time I stopped. While most of the game is feel-good and adventurous, there was something really sad about seeing someone who once was a big hero, discovering he's too old and realizing he can never go adventuring like he used to.
Just one last quest. Another notch in my feather, a voyage to Neptune's kingdom, or a journey through the infinite desert. Please, Mira, one final adventure.
A wonderful adventure experience I'd happily revisit, even with the lesser last episode. Number 18. Fire Emblem: Three Houses. On the surface, Three Houses looks like a below-average game. Rather weak graphics, scenes that mostly consist of characters talking with the same animation, and there are a limited amount of battlefields. Yes, it's addictingly fun. All the effort went into the story, characters, and gameplay, and this is where the game hits bullseye. You are a teacher that can choose between 3 classes. Each class provides an enormous storyline from a different point of view that each can take around 60 hours to beat. While the game only asks you to do one class, it's very tempting to try another one in order to get to know the rest of the characters or see the story from a different point of view. Throughout the game, I really formed a bond with the class, and I grew accustomed to interacting with these characters on a daily basis. Combat is a really fun aspect too. It's a tactical RPG where you move the characters on a board and make them do one action each turn. You need to build a team that has a good balance between magic, close combat, support, and offense. And there's always something to work towards in terms of leveling, either reaching a higher class, maxing out a skill, or just making sure all members of your team are in a fitting level. One of the best Nintendo exclusive games I've played this past decade, and I'm eager to try some of the older entries in the series too. I don't think I'll ever be ready to deal with permadeath mode though. Number 17. South Park: The Fractured Butthole. A great example of how to do a video game adaptation right. The Fractured Butthole feels like you're playing a South Park season. Based on the Coon and Friends arc, the story is about the kids playing superheroes. What starts as an innocent task where you try to find a missing cat gets immensely convoluted the more the story goes on, poking fun at gender neutrality, redneck stereotypes, video game tropes, with plenty of inappropriate racist jokes, gross out humor, or plain absurdness. This superhero satire perfectly captures the strength of the show, and it's hands down one of the funniest games I've ever played.
The mistress of BDSM, your dominatrix dream come true. It's spontaneous bootay.
Hey, honey, you ain't ready for this bootay.
The gameplay is in some aspects similar to Fire Emblem in that it uses a board-style combat system. But some of the biggest differences are that the board is very small and the game heavily emphasizes the position of the characters. Each move affects certain spaces on the field, and there are often specific spaces on the field you want to avoid or you want to throw your enemies onto. Throughout the campaign, there are plenty of clever ways they make use of the board, giving the combat a lot more depth than its predecessor, in my opinion. I loved both the main games as well as the very enjoyable DLC stages. A must-play for any fan of the show, and I'm really hoping this gets a sequel. Number 16. Tomb Raider. One of the most iconic female faces in video games, Lara Croft. My dynamite gal. While I never played any of the old Tomb Raider games, this reboot is so much fun that I became a fan of the modern series. The gameplay is a great mix between puzzling, platforming, exploring, and third-person shooting. While the game is mostly linear, the areas are pretty big and there are plenty of reasons to explore. When doing so, you'll find lots of small platform puzzles challenges that reward you with collectibles. The combat is responsive and fun to do. There's a decent mix of enemies and a nice selection of weapons. Combine that with some spectacular interactive action sequences and you'll get a really fun action game. The only problem I have is that the story is really dull. It feels like some sort of lame Hollywood summer movie plot. Overly serious with a lot of cliches and mostly forgettable characters. It's cool to see Lara make a transformation from an everyday woman to an action heroine, but that's about the only thing that's really worthwhile about the narrative. Still, the forgettable plot doesn't take away of the awesome gameplay, spectacular action sequences, and fun puzzles. A great game I've happily played multiple times and I wouldn't mind playing it again soon. Merely typing about this makes me excited to replay it again, but first I'll finish the billion other games I'm still doing. Number 15. Persona 5. To me, Persona 5 was one of the biggest pleasant surprises of the past decade. On paper, it sounds like a game I shouldn't like at all. At the time, I hadn't played much turn-based RPGs that I genuinely enjoyed. Anime is a real hit and miss with me in general, and 100+ hours I usually find tediously long for a game. But Persona 5 manages to be a great exception in all categories. The story always had something to say, whether you were developing a bond with a friend, learning about a new bad guy, or making personal growth. The turn-based RPG has a whole lot of depth to it, constantly offering new moves, new characters, new enemies, and other things to keep the combat interesting. It easily has the best HUD design of any game ever, and the style is very pleasant to look at in general. The music is relaxing, catchy, energetic, and just all around memorable. This makes Persona 5 an absolute blast to play. After a while, I grew really attached to these characters, and finishing this game almost felt like saying goodbye to some friends. The story is so simple on the surface, yet so full of depth in terms of what they do with it. An alternative reality where the evil deeds of a person get a physical representation. Here you can make the evildoer have a change of heart by invading the physical representation of their evil deeds. You aren't a superhero fighting thugs and thieves by throwing them in jail, but you're invading the minds of corrupt, power-hungry people. From politicians that abuse their position, scamming artists, abusive teachers, you name it. The real world needs phantom thieves. To me, Persona 5 has become a staple of why it's important to sometimes give a game the benefit of the doubt. You might miss out on something truly amazing if you don't. Number 14. Until Dawn. If you know me, you know that I absolutely adore the interactive drama genre. The engaging interactive stories, cinematic visuals, the influence you have on the characters or the story in general. I am really into these types of games. Until Dawn was a title that came out of nowhere and said, what if we take the Quantic Dream formula but apply it to a horror game where all characters can either die or survive? While it's full of horror tropes and cheap jump scares, the characters are actually very well developed and keeping them alive isn't particularly easy. The more times I replayed Until Dawn, the better it got because if you play the early levels when you already know each character, it makes the story all the better. Some characters that I didn't like at first ended up as some of my favorites after multiple playthroughs, while there are other characters that start off likable, but turn out to have more awful sides to them.
Ash! What are you doing?
In the first playthrough, there were some truly hard choices, like picking between which of your friends is sawed in two, or who to shoot in a life or death scenario. When replaying the game, you find out that a lot of choices don't really affect the story, but I was still very engaged by seeing how these choices affected the characters. And in some cases, a small choice could bite you in the ass later down the line. In terms of presentation, Until Dawn has a dark, eerie atmosphere with great acting, very realistic graphics, and artistic cinematic compositions. It's definitely an experience with its own identity. I'm eager to see how the future interactive drama games from Supermassive will turn out. Number 13. God of War. The sequel I didn't know I wanted. Even though the older God of War games are awesome, they got repetitive after a while and the story of the sequels are very forgettable. This new version takes the core ideas of the old games but completely redoes the combat, changes the theme from Greek mythology to Norse, and it has more emotional story that puts the main focus on the characters, rather than another bloodbath revenge plot. The bond Kratos has with his son feels very raw and genuine. Kratos sounds like one of the worst video game characters to be your father.
Thank the gods you came back for me!
I didn't come back for you.
But while he definitely is tough, through his hardness you know he genuinely cares for his son and he just wants to toughen him up for all the dangers in the world. The combat, while completely different, is immensely satisfying for its own reasons. It's a close combat system, but it manages to keep the combo-heavy nature against multiple enemies. The graphics are breathtaking with a very detailed, unique world and a beautiful use of colors. The monsters are intimidating and the bosses, while there aren't many, are really damn good. The story has multiple loose threads near the end, while its main plot is perfectly wrapped up. In other words, plenty to look forward to in a sequel. Number 12. Catherine Full Body. This was one of the most overlooked games of 2019. I was genuinely surprised that not a single gaming YouTuber I follow even mentioned it. Granted, it's an HD expansion instead of a game that's 100% new, but as far as HD expansions go, this is one of the most cleverly polished I've ever seen. Catherine Full Body is a platform puzzle game where you need to move blocks in a 3D environment while dodging enemies and obstacles. Combined with a weird as hell, but also fun as hell story about a man who cheated on his wife, and it's up to you to decide how he should respond. Stories can vary between talking to your loved one and trying to make things right, to mating with demons or getting kidnapped by aliens. It's such a unique, bizarre mix of elements that don't sound that fascinating on paper by themselves, but somehow flow seamlessly together in execution. With its pretty visuals, memorable soundtrack, great voice acting, and overwhelming amount of optional stuff, Catherine Full Body became one of my favorite gaming experiences of the past decade. My 11th favorite game of the past decade is Sonic Generations. When done right, Sonic can offer some of the most satisfying platform I've ever seen. So why does he screw up so many times? Sonic Generations is some sort of best of Sonic. All highlights from previous games return, but you can race through them in both 2D and 3D. What's awesome about the platforming in these stages is that there are multiple routes. The fastest route is the hardest to do, but if you fail the fastest route, you fall on a longer route instead of dying. Fall again and you usually land on the longest route or get kicked back to the checkpoint. This means that in order to get the fastest time, you need to have godlike reflexes and have good knowledge of the levels. Perfecting a stage is hard, but immensely satisfying if you pull off that flawless run. While there are many classic collections, remasters, or remakes of popular franchises nowadays, I can't think of a single franchise where both the old generation and the new generation are mixed into a new, unique experience like Generations. It's both a celebration of Sonic's history, as well as an awesome standalone game that offers some of the best platforming I have ever seen. Another thing Generations does exceptionally well are the optional missions. These aren't just beat this stage within a time limit or beat the stage while killing an X amount of enemies, but they completely adjusted the levels so that you play them in a different fashion, often emphasizing the use of a special move or changing the overall structure. This is how to make great, fun optional challenges. Change the way you approach a level while keeping the core gameplay. Sure, not all of the optional missions work and not all levels are that fun, but a good 90% of this game is pure awesomeness. Despite Sonic's ups and downs, Generation will always be a perfect celebration of the best of Sonic's 2D and 3D times. So that was part 1 of my favorite games of the past decade. Part 2 will be online next week. Want to keep up to date? Why not leave a like and a sub? I hope you enjoyed the video and thanks for watching.